give it another minute or two. I see folks are still joining. And we're switching to a monthly schedule starting the fall, right? So we get lots of suggestions and nominations and volunteers for speakers for the next academic year. So I think I'll go ahead and get started. I'll provide my introduction as others are still joining. And Sarah, by the time I'm ready to turn it over to you, we should have a full house. So this is Brian Mittman. I'd like to welcome you to our August webinar in the Southern California Regional Dissemination Implementation Improvement Science Series. We have a slight change in the program for today. We originally hoped to have two presenters. One of them, though, Melissa O'Doherty's had an urgent medical issue that's come up. We're hoping to reschedule her at some point in the future. She's been very active as a member and a leader of various patient advisory councils and different kinds of research programs, and was going to provide some nice commentary and examples of some of the things that will be presented by our main presenter, and that is Sarah Madrid. You can see in Sarah, I guess I'll do the hard work of spelling out the acronyms. Sarah is based at Kaiser Permanente, Colorado. She co-chairs the Patient Engagement and Research Special Interest Group, which is part of the Healthcare Systems Research Network, HSR&D. That's a collaboration of the large integrated delivery systems across the U.S. and international members. It was formerly known as the HMO Research Network. But this patient engagement special interest group has been very active for a number of years and has developed a valuable patient engagement workbook that Sarah will present. It's available online, and we hope that all of you will take a look at it after the webinar. Sarah will also provide some case studies, some illustrations of how the workbook, some of the techniques covered have been used in some of the research that she's been involved in. So we'll stop at various points for questions and answers. All of you, the attendees, will be muted, but you can get in touch with us through the chat feature, but we will open up all the microphones for the Q&A. So Sarah, thanks again for agreeing to present, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate this opportunity to present the workbook to this group. I am so sorry Melissa couldn't join today. I was looking forward to learning from her as well. I hope I can make a little bit for that loss. Let's dig in. Ibrahim, next slide. So I'm going to talk about today is a product of the HCSRN's Patient Engagement and Research Scientific Interest Group. And thanks to Brian for doing the heavy lifting on that. We started as a work group in 2012. The formal SIG has been active for a little over 3 years. We now have over 100 members from both the HCSRN and several external organizations. Next slide. So lists reflects our original goal way back in 2012 of simply building a community of practice and exploring what resources we all had. And now we've evolved over the years from helping member organizations figure out how to conduct meaningful patient-engaged research to working on methods for assessing the impacts of engagement on the research process. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. Slide. This workbook is a result of a survey that we conducted soon after we became a formal interest group in the network. We really just wanted to find out from our members what they were already doing well and see if the outcomes could support a more generalizable tool. Next slide. Turned out that the researchers in the HCSRN had a really pretty impressive range of experience in patient-engaged research already. And so the input that we got from them led directly to this workbook. Next slide. And what we're hoping is that the workbook will be used upstream from engaging patient partners on the research team, because it provides some really fundamental checklists and things to consider when you're just getting ready for engagement. What I like about it too is that as a workbook, it can customize for specific projects and to specific organizations. So it walks you through pre-engagement and then early engagement steps, and concludes with some sunsetting suggestions for when a study ends. It doesn't include recommendations for the phases of research in between. Those are actually the subject of an engagement basics workshop that we put on in March of 2016. And we've summarized those in a manuscript. I'd be happy to share the citation for that if there's interest in seeing that. Slide. So this thing we ask, we're going to go through this, nope, too far, one back, thanks. I'm going to go through the workbook itself so that I can explain. Pretty self-explanatory, but we'll see what we can get out of it. First thing we ask you to think about is what your rationale is for engaging patients on your research team. It really helps to have a clear justification for this. That way you can communicate it to the funder in your proposal. You can communicate it to the rest of people on the research team and then to the potential patient partners and talk to them about the roles that they might play. Next slide. So one of the earliest considerations for engaged research is how much it costs. And that's both time and then concrete expenses as well. So first think through how much time you estimate you'll spend on things like this, identifying and recruitment, training, consultations, and evaluation. And that way you can build a budget that incorporates that time. Next slide. The other thing to think about is what your partner costs will be. And so it's not just compensating your patient partners, but also making sure that you're making it easier for them to actually participate by reimbursing the expenses of attending meetings and things like that. And finally, we really encourage considering the benefits of letting your partners engage with dissemination of the results of the research. Over the past couple of years, we've supported patient partners attending the HCSRN conference, and they've both presented research results and have been discussants on panels. So it's really an effective dissemination method. There's just an invaluable legitimacy or credibility that they can confirm that outweighs the costs of their travel and time. Next slide. This helps you develop a clear idea of what you're engaging patients for. While these partner roles can evolve over time and definitely benefit from partner input on what they want to do, going into it with expectations can really simplify your budget estimating and developing identification and recruitment methods. It helps you to sketch out a vision of who this patient partner might be, who you're really looking for. Next slide. So out the partner's engagement like this will really complement the work that you've put on developing the role statements. You'll need to know all of these things before you start recruiting. And one of the things that comes up is compensation. It's really hard to figure out how much you should pay your partners for the work that they're doing. There are often restrictions on partner compensation in research. They can come from a lot of different sources. These are probably the most obvious ones, but you may find that others crop up as you put in this prep work ahead of the process. We strongly recommend a minimum of $25 an hour for partners, but also believe that the more substantial the role they play, for example, if they're a co-PI or a co-I, that amount should be increased. Next slide. Since compensation is often really closely related to contracting, we include here some things to think about for that aspect as well. Another activity that complements your efforts to identify who you're looking for in a patient partner. These studies are specific to a disease or health burden, to gender or age specific. So, for example, if you're planning to study Latino women over 50 with diabetes, the most effective patient partners will probably be Latino women over 50 with diabetes. You may have other criteria that you're looking for. We gave a little room there to add in whatever those are. And the next slide into how to identify those diabetic Latino women over 50. There are a lot of ways to identify potential patient partners. Researchers embedded in health systems like Kaiser or the VA, we have a real advantage in that we've got such easy access to patients that being embedded gives us. Here in Colorado, we've also developed an online network. It's called the Partners in Research Network, or COPPER. That's the Colorado Patient Partners in Research Network. And that is an online sort of mechanism that connects network members with research teams. We've got over 500 members now with health conditions and disease burdens. So researchers are able to go to the website and request partners with specific characteristics. And our recruitment for the network actually uses the same methods shown here. We have put in flyers in clinics. We've handed out flyers at events like Denver Pride, and maintain a social media presence to drive potential members to the website. We haven't had the funding to date to put into local media advertising, but I have colleagues that, I'm sorry, my screen just went blank, Brian. Give me a second. There we go. Not sure what happened. I lost the slides. And we maintain a social media presence, as I was saying, to try to get members to come to the website. Haven't had the fund to go into local media advertising, but I know colleagues elsewhere who have reported success with taking up spots on local radio shows. Next slide. Let's here. Brian, sorry, something is going on with my screen, and I am losing the.
Oh, are you able to see the?
Yeah, see the IRB compliance slide. It looks fine for me. So, Sarah, maybe.
Oh, and now I got the recruitment, the page number or section number 5, recruitment.
6, IRB compliance.
Okay, what's happening is that my VPN is reconnecting. I'm so sorry.
So one is for you to use your own local version and ask you to advance, and I guess you could read the title just to make sure we're all in sync.
Right, okay. I hope that it's reconnecting right now, so I'm hoping this will work. So on IRB and compliance, that's the next slide.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely not seeing that. Okay. So we include this slide. I mean, most IRBs these days seem to be familiar enough with patient engagement and research to recognize that at this point they really don't have any oversight on the engagement of partners. They're not subjects of research. They're actually members of research teams. But at this page, just in case IRB review is required, it can help you think through some of the things that they will probably ask about. Next slide. Okay, the slide I'm seeing is a flowchart. Do you have that? Okay, so a few years ago, Borska, Rabin, and I developed this flowchart to educate our IRB director. We really needed to walk him through these distinctions between patient partners engaged in research and patients that are subjects of research. So it helps show where along the continuum of engagement you can begin to draw a line between those two. And for our purposes here at Kaiser, Colorado, we decided that one-off focus groups, for example, didn't constitute engagement if the results were going to be used as data for a research study. The critical distinction, in our view, came to the if the input provided by partners in any context is used to design, interpret, or otherwise improve a research study and its methods, then we argue that that's engagement, and our IRB director eventually agreed with us. Next slide. Number 7, other departments.
Yeah.
Thank you. Many organizations require departmental review outside of the research shop when you're bringing in a patient partner. And so, for example, in some cases, partners are actually hired by the organization for the duration of the study. So in that case, the facilities department even gets involved. The partner needs a desk or an office or space, and they probably need a badge to get in and out of buildings. So your organizations may have other requirements. We've left a little room for those as needed. Next slide. To prepare to screen promising candidates. Get ready to screen the patient partners that you've identified. Take a little time to think through the methods that you think will be most effective. If you're only screening a few people, use the more personal one-on-one methods. I recently recruited 6 people for an advisory panel for a genetic testing return of results study. And I spoke on the phone with all of the candidates first and met face-to-face with those who were still interested in participating and frankly, those who I still wanted to work with. It needs to be both ways. I needed only 5 people, but I am hiring this 6th one because I just thought he would be a great participant on the panel. He was super interested in the subject. He's a really articulate communicator and just an all-around good guy, clearly really easygoing. And those were all really important criteria for me. So if you're looking for more partners than that, you can go with an online screening survey, but eventually you are going to want to talk to them and possibly even meet them in person. Next slide. This is 9 screening practices, first of 2. So there are some ways you can try to avoid bias when you're screening people. I mean, so many times people will self-select for these kinds of opportunities, so you need to kind of go into it knowing that you've got to check out more than whether they're just a real person. Oh dear, I have a typo on this page that I meant to correct before I sent it off. The second line should read, they have a desire for a platform to communicate dissatisfaction. Or I guess it could say no apparent desire. We have had to weed out people who really just want a forum to complain about something horrible that the health system or their physician or the claims department did to them. In those cases, we tend to thank them profusely for their interest in the study and then refer them to member services. At the bottom, you can see the point about whether or not the study topic is controversial. If it is, you'll talk to people, and if people seem to hold really extreme views on the topic, then you really have to assess how that will affect their participation. And if you have more than one patient partner, how that will affect the dynamics with the rest of the group. Next slide. So meeting practices continued. So in the case that I just talked about, an initial phone interview provided all the details about the logistics of the study, and any of these can be deal breakers for candidates. So they were able to make a decision based on knowing already what's involved, and so it's an informed decision about whether or not to participate. It reduces the chance that 6 months later bow out because they didn't realize that it was going to involve so much. Next slide. So team training is often really just completely overlooked, but it's an important step to prepare for engaging partners. I really think that if you can't train your team for some reason, which would have to be a good one, then you should at least review the rules of engagement and make sure everyone understands that the partner is just as much of an expert as anyone else on the team. They are probably not a statistician or some other specialized research professional, but they definitely bring experience as a patient that is critical to the product, the object. Expertise on the subject of the study that others on the team probably don't have. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some criteria that Danielle Lavallee up at the University of Washington developed. It provides a framework for a fundamental set of rules of engagement. You can build out your own rules from this. I'd encourage anyone who works with patient partners to get a hold of this article and read it, and really consider adopting the recommendations that she has in that regarding these criteria. We'll formalize at the latest by the time the partner actually begins work on the project. Few things that you may need to have in place. Your organization may have others, so there's room for others, but definitely you'll need information about how to compensate them. You'll need tracks put in place, and then any other sort of communication and data sharing protocols that come up, especially if you're working with PHI. Next slide. If you want to train your patient partners, they're going to need some orientation at the very least, possibly more substantive training depending on the study. It's also really important to remind them that their job is to share their perspectives. There are questionably power dynamics in most engagement contexts. So it can really help to reassure them that it's okay to disagree with the physician, PI, or with this researcher. For one engagement event a colleague of mine led, there were 5 patient panelists and a room full of researchers, policymakers, and other, marketing bucks for a one-day meeting. And this just was begging to create discomfort for these poor partners. So they planned the day to start with separate meetings for both the partners and the scientists. And in the one for the partners, they gave a full description of the potential project that they were discussing on this day, background on the health issue, and then basically gave them full permission to assert themselves and their thoughts with the larger group. In the scientist meeting, meanwhile, they were focusing on the process engagement and how important it is to really hear the patient perspectives and to disregard them as somehow less educated or ill-informed, and the need to understand that the patient's expertise is their experience as a patient, and that they're more informed about that than any of them. And apparently this really worked. The partners were highly engaged. The scientists were receptive to what they had to say, and the outcomes were really positive. Next slide, please. So, questions come up about retaining patient partners a lot, especially when their involvement kind of ebbs and flows over time. So we've included this list of suggestions for ways to encourage continued engagement. And last one about using food, I think is one of the most important ones. There's something really, but commensality, eating with people really helps cement relationships and keep people sort of care about one another. Next slide, please. So of the most overlooked pieces of this workbook is the need to do regular monitoring and evaluation of the engagement process. And it's important because it gives you and the partners a chance to air misunderstandings or clarify expectations, and it can really lead to iterative improvements to study methods, for example, over time. I recommend no less frequent than about once a quarter. By Cancer Survivor Advisory Board, we evaluate every monthly meeting so that we can continue to improve the format and the content and such. Next slide. So this is sort of a fun slide, I hope. I lead a subgroup of the scientific interest group with the HSR&D that focuses on developing methods to assess the impact of engagement on the research process itself. A lot has been done on assessing impact on the actors, so we wanted to focus more on how it affects the process. And flow diagram is the product of a day-and-a-half-long workshop that we held in Denver last fall to identify the critical components of engagement at each stage of the research process. So you can see the results included some overarching principles up at the top that are common to all stages. And as you move down, they break down into stage-specific components and outcomes. From this, we were able to develop a really high-level theoretical impact flow, and that's at the bottom there, that intends that engagement begins way upstream in the process, well before the proposal, in a more relevant patient-centered research question, which leads to a more relevant proposal, better study design, and include more effective methods, which result in faster or more sustained recruitment to the study, and even higher quality data. With our interpretation of the data, the results can be seen as more legitimate, and there's a higher chance of the results being translated or adopted, and that, we hope, can lead to better clinical practice, communication between patients and providers, more informed patients, they've got information they need to make decisions, and then the holy grail, which is improved health outcomes. So this all needs to be validated, and it will be really, really difficult to build an evidence base that having a more patient-centered research question will eventually lead to better health outcomes, but we really wanted to start somewhere. Next, please. Finally, the study is ending, and because almost all engagement is pretty touchy-feely, that makes a lot of hardcore researchers so uncomfortable. We like to suggest that you actually take the time to reflect on the study. Talk about the processes that you used, what your successes and challenges were, and get into the specific benefits of engagement, both for the people involved and, again, for the research itself. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is one I added earlier today when I found out that Melissa was not going to be able to join us. I've added in a case study. And so, Brian, I think at this point you were going to open it up for some questions and answers about the workbook itself.
Exactly. So, Ibrahim, if you can open up everyone's audio. We did, because Melissa's not able to join us, have time for Sarah to share some of her experiences in actual projects. But before doing that, we wanted to leave some time for any questions or comments about the workbook. Both questions as to how it was put together and what it contains and what it suggests, but also any comments from others who have similar resources or approaches or even different approaches.
Ooh,
so
yes,
let me open the floor.
Hi, this is Kim. I don't know if you're waiting for to raise hands online, or should we just speak?
Speak up. Thank you.
All right, it's Kathy from University of California, Davis.
Great.
And the question is about the role and responsibilities of partners. Is that something that you all put some thought into or documented, specifically what their role and how they would actually conduct the work as part of an advisory board or as part of the study team?
In terms of like a scope of work for them?
Work or activities and responsibilities.
Yeah, we haven't documented that, Kathy. I think that's an excellent idea, and it would really flesh out the workbook in that section. Do you have anything like that? Have you heard of anything else like that?
We're part of the Precision Medicine Initiative and one of the clinical data research networks, and we write a charter for an advisory board and things like that, which has a really high level what's the group supposed to complete or what the deliverables. As we go into the precision medicine piece, where we have multiple levels of participant engagement, we're kind of struggling with what's the role of someone at a sort of steering committee advisory level where they meet twice a year, or somebody who's local who we need to be part of ongoing quality checking, or so it's like all these different levels, and we're not quite sure what the role is.
Yeah, understandable. Wait, there's some obvious.
So it's a different engagement.
I missed what you said before. It's different engagement.
Partners are not employed. They don't become employees.
So they're volunteers?
They're voluntary, but we give them an honorarium.
Nice. Okay. Well, between that, there's a wide continuum between sort of weekly, even monthly engagement, and then a steering committee member that would probably attend meetings at most once or twice a year. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And though it seems that the steering committee members would be looking at much higher level issues that come up for the PMI work that you're doing, and that the people who are involved on a more frequent level would spend a lot of time providing input on processes that you're using or things you're developing to reach out to people. I'm not really sure what your work entails, so it's hard to come up with specifics on that, but you can start by trying to fill in that continuum. Start on either end and outline what you know to be true for them. And then I try to do documentation sort of over time. We recommend that you do this over time so that you have a record that you can look back on. You should probably reach out to our group and find out if people have that and that we can compile them in some way.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Other questions, comments? A question that actually follows up on the first question, and it may be one that is better handled during your case studies, and that has to do with the range of roles and responsibilities, and specifically thinking about the continuum from advisory up to and including full active participation in recruitment and data collection. Those are the activities that we most often hear about, and as far as active participation in research, a little bit less in analysis, perhaps a bit more in interpretation. And I'd be interested in hearing your experience with those, either now or it may be, as I said, better to handle in the context of a description of some actual text.
Well, I think that I'm hoping that we will also have people describe some of their experiences, because I think that a lot of experiences of engagement are very individualized. They're very specific to the study itself and frankly to the people who are involved. That's just a preface to the case study that I'll talk about later. There are so many different roles that patients can play. It depends, of course, on what you need, what you're looking for. I think that we've gotten past the stage when people thought that engagement was simply putting together a focus group and you know, sort of a one-off thing. I think that, for example, PCORI has done a really good job of impressing the importance of meaningful engagement, substantial engagement, and so really working ways that make sure that the people who you're working with have a voice, have a role that's important in terms of design of the study and coming up with methods and things like that. We've actually heard of people who have included patients in data analysis. I've got a colleague at Katie Washington now, who worked with a group of stakeholders, patient stakeholders, to develop a workbook on how patient partners can be involved in data analysis. And I can actually get that reference from her and send it to you if you'd like to distribute that as well. It makes it really hard to describe generally how these things work. And so, again, I'd really like to hear from others about what their experience has been with recruiting people for, say, specific roles, and then how those have evolved over time, and whether or not you've really gotten from them what was important to you and also what was important to them.
All good questions. Any volunteers?
Don't be.
We may have more learners than experts.
No, you don't have to be an expert. Well, I'm glad there are more and more people getting into this area. I think that despite some of the uncertainty about the biggest funder in this, about PCORI's future, I think that a lot of people who have been practicing patient-engaged research are realizing that it is the kind of the right way to do research. I've talked to a lot of people who said that they will never do it any other way. So that's encouraging, and all the more reason for more people to get involved.
And increasingly expected within VA peer review committees, within NIH as well. So there's another question that came from the chat box from Moira. She asks, she wonders if you've ever been approached for thoughts on involving patients in more iterative research process, such as co-design, co-production within Kaiser and other health systems. It might not fit into the categories of the guidebook, but she's interested in knowing whether you field questions on this in the organization. If researchers may need guidance on how to engage patients in, that co-design, co-production type of activity.
Yeah. Myra, such a good question. I think that co-design and co-production is what the essence of patient engagement should be. And so in that sense, I think that the workbook isn't responsive. The specific processes of co-design and co-production, I'm assuming that those are technical terms, and frankly, I'm not familiar with them. But we have not fielded questions like that so far. We have a lot of people who have asked about how to make engagement meaningful, and I think that comes down to ensuring that the criteria that I talked about earlier briefly, the trust and respect, fairness, legitimacy, capability, and another one that I now can't remember. Those are things that if you are talking to your partners about on a regular basis, you'll learn from them whether or not they truly feel like they are valued, whether they have a voice, they are in a contribution. And I think if you're not hitting all those points, then you're not really getting the best of engagement from someone, the best that someone can give. I would argue that that doesn't constitute then meaningful engagement. On level, you're bringing up another level, which is a more sort of practice-based level, which is in terms of co-design and co-production. You're asking people to actually sit down with you and talk through, for example, a proposal, and study methods and come up with timelines and implementation strategies. And I'd love it if you want to speak up and tell me more about what you're talking about.
Sure, and this is more, and I want to get to your case study. I was just in a loud place, so I chatted in the questions. Yeah, I think that I think by co-production and co-design, I just meant the process where the sort of intervention strategies themselves are developed kind of an internship together. So rather than sort of the idea of you develop everything at the beginning and then you implement and maybe get some advice along the way, and then there's a closure iterative process. And so I was curious if folks have come to say, how do we handle participation?
Okay.
There's an area where people may need guidance going forward, because it is increasingly, it does seem that more work is done that way, but didn't want to take too much time out of the call to raise.
No worries.
Appreciate
I
your
think
answer just now.
It speaks directly to this idea of checking in with partners regularly, and the best way to engage someone is to keep them engaged over time. There will be ebbs and flows in levels of engagement. Obviously, at the very beginning, when you're developing proposals and things like that, and designing studies, they're going to be, you hope, really involved in helping to figure out how you're going to do this study. As you start to implement, though, it could be that unless they play an active role in data collection, things like that, they will probably drop off a little bit for a while. And so it's good to, keep them updated. We'd love to see if people aren't going to be engaged for 3 to 6 months, give them an update once a month, telling them what's happening with your recruitment and things like that. But also check in with them about if you run into problems, say, with recruitment. If some strategy that you've come up with just isn't working as well as you'd hoped, then you can engage them again and ask them for help in remediating whatever that is. So I hope that helps a little bit more.
So I don't see additional questions on the chat. So Sarah, why don't we turn it back to you and have you talk a little bit more, and then if there's time, we'll have another round of questions and discussion.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm going to describe Pei Advisory Board that I set up 3 years ago. Within our research department, we have what's called a Center of Excellence in Cancer and Genetics Research. And all cancer researchers in our institute came to me a little over 3 years ago and said, all this patient engagement stuff, we really feel like we need to do that. They're pretty typical research scientists in that they just don't want to actually talk to patients. They realized that they were really missing a critical perspective. And they also know that I do like to talk to patients. I'm an anthropologist. I'll talk to anyone. And so they figured I could help create and manage a group like this for them. So we knew from the get-go that we wanted an advisory board made up of cancer survivors, and preferably a diverse group by age and by gender and by cancer type. So the question became, where do you find them? How do you identify these people? And when I started asking around my department, my co-author on this workbook, in fact, Leslie Wright, let me know that she had actually recruited partners in the past through a KPCO, Cancer Survivors Support Group. So it's a support group that runs out of the oncology department within our region. And the group happened to be run by a social worker who used to go to the same spin classes that I did. So this all sounds random, but anecdotally, randomness seems to be a really common characteristic of partner identification at different organizations. I mentioned it earlier, that things just become very specific to the people involved and to the study involved in the team. So, you know, if I didn't have a colleague with that experience, I could definitely have found out that there's an established cancer survivor support group, and I could have easily contacted the organizer about getting help recruiting. Chances are he would have been just as collegiate about doing that. So an example of how individualized identification processes and all engagement processes end up being. I sent a recruitment email to Dennis, who then forwarded it with his endorsement to all of the members of the support group. And within an hour, I had heard back from probably a dozen or so. Most of them told me later that they probably wouldn't have responded at all without his endorsement. They trust him so implicitly they were willing to follow up on it just on that basis. And so they responded to me via email, and we continued to use email to get through all those early logistics. And in this case, I wanted to let them know that they were monthly meetings. They were going to be held at my department. They were an hour long. They compensated $50 an hour, and we would include lunch. I also was able to describe in an email what the sort of scope of work was looking like. So that process cut the group to 9 people. We had 7 women and 2 men with a really nice range of cancer types and an okay range of age diversity. I think that our youngest is probably in her late 30s. And then I talked to everybody on the phone and answered their questions. And because I had covered the logistics and the work scope in email, I was really able to use the phone conversations to get a lot more into their own experiences, their motivations for wanting to be on the board, their expectations for it, and what they wanted to get out of it. So we scheduled our meetings, and the first meeting we scheduled as 2.5 hours long instead of just an hour. We wanted to devote the first meeting just to training and orientation, and that was both for the partners and for the cancer researchers. We could use 3 or 4 hours. We definitely could have filled up that time, but since we needed to hold this first one in the evening, we didn't want to keep people out too late, so kept it to 2.5 hours, and that included dinner. So the first thing we did was an introduction called a conocimiento, which is basically an exercise where you have everybody in the group answer questions. Very easy questions. For example, I think I asked what their favorite vacation was or what their favorite dish is that they like to cook. And everybody writes on a piece of poster paper what their response is to that. You then go one by one through the group and have them talk about their answers. And this is a really good sort of introduction to people. It gets people sort of comparing experiences and in many cases laughing about experiences. So that was a good way to break ice. So on to give a solid background on the research being done by the investigators in our department. We had a Research 101 module. We had an IRB and compliance module. And then we did a module on the purpose of engaging patients in research, really why we're interested in doing this. And then the last part of the training we gave them a flyer for the KP Research Bank, an already existing piece of patient-facing material, and had them react to that, what they thought about it. Was it patient-friendly? How was the language? Things like that, just so that they could have an experience like that. Since then, our monthly meetings have involved presentations by different investigators and by project managers on existing or new projects or planned projects, and the board provides input on areas, they see that needs work, or where the researcher may feel less confident about what they've got. We've also had cancer researchers from other shops present remotely and get input from the board, and that's worked remarkably well, despite their not being present. Over the years, we've definitely had some attrition in this group. One of them started coming to the meetings, and he would eat lunch, and he seemed to participate only grudgingly. I mean, he just clearly really did not want to be there. And I spoke to him a few times, tried to get at what was going on. Eventually, I learned that his wife had become ill. And although he really felt an obligation to keep coming to the meetings, he recognized that he was really distracted and wasn't contributing as much anymore. And we agreed that he would leave the board. We had another member move, and another member had a relapse, which was really painful. But he is okay. And in the meantime, we were able to recruit 2 other people to join. Both of those new people were referrals from current board members, which was kind of cool. So as you can imagine, most of that first year was about the members sort of finding their voices and getting familiar with each other and with us and the researchers, and learning to trust their gut when they were responding to things. There was a lot of, I don't know if this is right, but, and so they got to be really comfortable with their own thoughts about what they were being asked to respond to. They got just much more confident, and so that evolution continues. It's become this incredibly productive group, and used to provide really good input for our researchers. One of the things that I wanted to describe too is how several members have gone on and added other forms of engagement along the way. So, for example, one member worked with me on both of the workshops that I organized last year, and then went on and applied for and received a PCORI scholarship to attend the PCORI annual meeting last year. We had another member do that too, and both are applying to go back again this year. One is now the co-chair of the National Community Advisory Board for the KP Research Bank. Another one has joined a health advisory group that works with Governor Hickenlooper, our governor here in Colorado. The group is funded by internal KPCO funds that I have to apply for every year, and I will continue to apply for those as long as our cancer researchers feel that the group is helpful and that they feel like they need the input. So we've got a few minutes. Does anybody have questions at all about what I was just describing?
Comments on your own experiences, and Ibrahima,
exactly,
we have mics open.
It's all open now.
Right. Okay. Heard more input from a barking dog than from our attendees.
This is Kathy Kim again. I did just share a few minutes about the kind of process that we're engaged in right now.
Oh, fantastic.
Work. And so we used a similar process to what you've described in terms of creating our advisory boards. But in this phase of work, we are co-designing research studies. And we have 3 clinical areas of focus, and so we've had 3 different research co-design teams that were convened. And so we used an application process to select the patient and clinician partners to be part of the research co-design team. And Hugo Campos, who is our co-investigator, who's actually on the webinar today, helped us to design those criteria and interview questions. And so we had people who were interested fill out a very short application. I think we had 5 questions or something like that. And then we had a committee that was composed of researcher, Hugo, therefore people reviewed them, and then we interviewed each candidate. So we ended up with about 14 people on our heart failure co-design team and 14 on our weight management co-design team. And right now, working with the group, actually design comparative effectiveness research studies that we will either do with existing resources and data in our network, or we'll apply, for funding to do them. But it's been a really interesting process to figure out how much, do we need to try and educate our various stakeholder groups with this co-design team, because we have patients and then researchers and we have clinicians, about, the research aspects of it versus really respect the expertise that they come with and not try to force them into being junior researchers. So it's a challenge in trying to help educate everybody and also not force them into another stakeholder group.
Right. A pragmatic question: how did you identify your initial applicants?
Yeah, we actually did an online Delphi consensus panel to develop the research priorities in our prior phase. 120 participant panel for each of the 3 conditions. So each one, we had 120 expert panel that were 1/3 clinicians and 1/3 researchers. So we opened up applications to all members of the panel to be on the co-design team.
Okay, great. It speaks some to the roles and responsibilities questions that came up earlier, and the idea of documentation. Have you taken the time to document what the roles are that these people are playing on the co-design teams?
Yeah, so we wrote a charter. So we have like this very high level of,
okay.
But it doesn't get to, I think, what we need. So it's your role is to share your perspective and, to join 4 conference calls. And, so it's sort of, I feel a little super. I think as we go through this, we do want to document it to know if others are doing as well.
Wow, thank you, Kathy. That sounds like a really, really good process. I'd love to hear how it goes.
Thank you. We've had our success.
Yeah.
Our Kawasaki disease team actually developed a comparative effectiveness study and applied to PCORI, got a $2.1 million comparative effectiveness grant. So, progress.
Well, fantastic. Congratulations. Wow.
So there's a question that came in via chat that I'd like to read and see if we can fit it in before we close. But Ibrahima, why don't you go ahead and put up some evaluation? We would like all of you to complete the evaluation. So the question is, I'm engaging with adolescents and young adults to plan research for chronic condition management in the community. Working with young people who have had limited experience in research, we've dedicated a lot of time. I just lost the chat because I'm sorry, I can get it back. the polling, it disappeared. Okay, working with young people who've had limited experience in research, we've dedicated a lot of time to describing general research processes and building relationships with each of our patient partners to help them understand the power of their voice in the research planning process. It's been a slow progression thus far, but the building of foundation with research orientation and team building has been critical to the process. So there's a question there, but I assume, Sarah, you would endorse that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fantastic that you're committed to spending the time that it really takes to develop the relationships. And I have to say, there at the HCSRN annual meeting this spring, there was one presentation that included 2 high school students who had been engaged from, I think, tween years on a study, and they came and actually presented for the PI, Larry Cushy, up in Northern Cal, and it was fantastic. I know that he will be able to continue working with these partners over time, and it just was a perspective that was incredibly compelling for all of us who were there. Well, way to go.
I was in the room, and I remember that and would agree. So for those of you who weren't reading in the chat box, the polling questions, the evaluation, you'll find those on the right-hand side. Again, if you could please take the time to complete the evaluation, we'd appreciate the feedback. Sarah, I'd like to thank you for presenting and for sharing the workbook. The URL is on the screen. If anyone doesn't have the ability to copy and paste, please follow up with me or Ibrahima. Sarah, I assume you'd be open for contact as well. Because
yes.
My view is this is quite valuable. It has a lot of applicability, not just to the work that we do within the integrated delivery systems, the HCSRN sites, but other sites as well. So again, I'd like to thank the attendees, and Sarah, thank you again for presenting.
Thank you, Brian. This was great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.